We always use metaphors of nature to legitimize ourselves. Darwin's theories were one thing, but social Darwinism and a lot of things related to that assume that nature was full of individualism, competition. They distorted Darwin's survival of the fittest, which actually to him meant best adapted to their environment, to think that it was constant war, constant competition, that the world was a giant Wall Street and everything was trying to compete with everything else. As science has become more sophisticated, as the technologies have gotten better, as new studies have emerged, more and more they've seen community, symbiosis, mutuality, relationship, mutual aid. Peter Kropotkin, the anarchist philosopher, of course, saw that at the end of the 19th century, but he was a rebel against the mainstream. So if we change our understanding of what nature is, if it turns out nature is socialist, is social, is collaborative, is communitarian, we see that a lot of the justifications for capitalism, for selfishness, for extractivism, a really important word in the climate movement, for that kind of I come here to grab everything I can and leave destruction behind, that the justifications for that no longer work so well. If you pretend that it's natural, it's necessary, it's inevitable, we see that nature does it a different way. We see other human cultures who've done it another way. And so I think that there's instruction and invitation there to maybe do it another way ourselves. I don't like to talk about feminism as waves because it really suggests a kind of generational segregation. And I connect very well to younger feminists. A French magazine once asked me, "What would you like to teach younger women?" And I said, "Nothing. They're teaching me." It's not quite so generational. But there have been periodic explosions of energy, and there was an extraordinary one in 2012, 2013. That's part of the current wave, I think. People often treat MeToo like it was separate because a lot of people didn't notice until movie stars got involved. But why was there space for movie stars, Hollywood actresses to speak up? Because we were 4 or 5 years into a feminist insurrection, a feminist transformation that created more awareness about the ways that sexual harassment, rape, and all the other forms of abuse take place. People were ready to hear them in a way they weren't before. Newspapers and magazines were willing to publish the articles about Harvey Weinstein. In the fall of 2017, when the two big reports about the movie producer Harvey Weinstein came out, a woman journalist said, "I tried to report on that 5 years ago, but my editor said, why bother?" He was not interested, which is shocking because, of course, Harvey Weinstein had 5 more years as a rapist and abuser as a result of that. So, and then people started to say Me Too failed because there's a backlash, but there's a very visible backlash against feminism in a larger sense. I completely do not argue with that. A bunch of things give us a more complex picture, one of which, the way that Me Too succeeds is one we'll never be able to measure. It taught a lot of men that you can no longer rape, and get away with it because it turns out that women have voices, and when they use them, sometimes people listen and believe them, and sometimes you go to jail for committing these crimes. But at the same time, I think the great majority of men look at women in a radically different way than they did 10, 20, 30, 40 years ago. You have these very noisy men who are the backlash against feminism. You have lots of ordinary men who treat their wives, their daughters, their sisters, their coworkers, their colleagues, their fellow scientists or fellow airline pilots very differently than they might used to have treated them. And of course, there weren't so many women scientists and airline pilots, 50 years ago. And so I think feminism has succeeded often in very quiet ways that do not make good news stories. So we have the problem again that actually maybe the majority of men are actually quite feminist and that they would answer questions about the rights, equality, qualifications of women very differently than their fathers would have, 50 years ago. But we have these very noisy men really trying to get attention because that's what they make their money off, and a news industry very excited to give them lots of attention. And I think it's serious. We should talk about them. We should talk about how it's influencing young men. It's kind of fascinating and horrific that we now have a political divide by gender among a lot of the young around the world. It's true in South Korea. I think it's true here in Spain. It's very true in North America, where a lot of young men have gone very far to the right. The right has been very good at seducing them, and Silicon Valley has been very good at seducing them. In the case of Silicon Valley, I think it's because the internet was made by a certain kind of man, and it tries to serve that man, but what it serves them is poison. So in a way, the young men are getting poisoned the most, whereas young women are becoming much more liberal and radical, and are also much less willing to put up with everything and anything for the sake of having a man. The kind of stuff that was normal to accept is now unacceptable for a lot of young women, and they would rather partner with another woman or not partner at all than be abused. I work a lot on climate change, and one of the really sad things I think we're struggling with is that a lot of people's worldviews of climate change are very stuck in the early 21st century when we didn't really have a good alternative to fossil fuel. And we've had an energy revolution that's been so slow, so incremental, and so technical. Most people don't know we had it. I talk about it all the time in the hope somebody will know. But at the beginning of the 21st century, wind and sun were really expensive, primitive, wholly inadequate technologies, much more expensive than fossil fuel. We've had an energy revolution, but it's happened in very tiny steps. It's happened very slowly, so that most people don't know that actually solar is the cheapest form of energy in most parts of the world. Solar and wind are almost universally distributed. We could solve the geopolitics of fossil fuel, where countries like Russia and Saudi Arabia have too much power in the world because they control this one commodity for a lot of other countries. So if people understand that actually we have a solution we have a way to exit the age of fossil fuel, and it could actually be a better world. We wouldn't have less. We wouldn't live in the dark. We wouldn't be giving things up. It would all be better in so many ways. And trying to get that story to people is central to actually realizing the climate action we need to not destroy the planet. The fossil fuel industry loves us to believe that it's too late and there's nothing we can do, because that's how we stop fighting against the fossil fuel industry. It serves them very well, which a lot of young climate doomers don't understand. The fossil fuel industry also loved climate footprints and pushed them very hard. The idea that what we should do for the climate is be very careful about what we consume, stay home, don't fly, don't eat meat, recycle your cans and bottles. When in fact, the thing we should all do for climate is fight the fossil fuel industry and all the institutions that serve it, along with protecting the natural world, and the other parts, because we need systemic change, not individual change. The obstacles are only political, and that's a sad thing. I think the news media are failing us. They're failing to tell people there is no apocalypse. We have the solutions. The obstacles are political. And if people understood that, they would fight a lot harder. But I also see almost an eagerness to give up on the part of really privileged people. Well, at the same time, I see people on the front lines, people on South Pacific Islands going underwater, people living in desperate situations where if they give up, if they do nothing, they may become refugees, their children may starve to death, they may be dispossessed, they may live under a dictatorship forever. Those people tend to not give up because giving up means immediate and terrible consequences. And so they're actually quite hopeful, whereas despair, as I write in one chapter in this book, is a luxury. It's often very comfortable people far away from the trouble deciding to give up by pretending that there's nothing we can do. It's too late. We never win. We don't have the power. Telling themselves these stories that excuse inaction. And I think ultimately the appeal of those stories is that it doesn't demand anything from us. Whereas the story that it's not too late, there's really important things we can do, we're deciding the fate of this population, or of the natural world with what we do or fail to do now gives us a lot of responsibility. And some people don't want it, but also they're very much steeped in a culture that hasn't told them ordinary people, when we come together as movements, as civil society, when we support the environmental organizations or the human rights organizations, actually do have a lot of power. So, one of the most deadly stories of our time, I think, is the idea that power is something that belongs to a very small group of people: famous people, rich people, elected officials, politicians, heads of corporations. When in fact, when you see something like the Arab Spring, Occupy Wall Street, Black Lives Matter, you see that they're actually quite afraid of us because they know something they don't want to tell us outright. We have a lot of power. And so getting that across to people and making them see that sometimes being an activist can be joyful and meaningful, feels like part of my job. So I've been trying to do it for 20-something years. I find stories, and we're storytelling animals. It turns out that animals have language, they use tools, they have social relationships, they have feelings, a lot of them dream. They're so much more complex than people thought they were 50 or 100 years ago. But we're really the storytelling animals. And some stories are prisons, are traps, prevent us from seeing ourselves. There are so many stories still in the world about why non-white people are inferior to white people, why Christianity is the only true religion, and, the rest of us are going to hell, why being heterosexual is natural and being gay is unnatural. Fortunately, science has just shown us a huge amount of fascinating sexual variety across the animal kingdom and the plant kingdom. Lots of bisexuality, hermaphrodism, polyamory, and all the rest. So changing the story doesn't change everything, but it's the beginning often of changing something.